Those of you who are in attendance this evening, if you would, please take a moment and check your cell phone to make sure that you have placed it on vibrate or silent. We appreciate that. For those of you who are participating online, we welcome you as well. Members of the public are asked to place their microphone on mute during the meeting, with the exception of any public hearing. At the appropriate point in the public hearing, I will invite the public to unmute their microphone for purposes of submitting such comments as they may wish to make, one person at a time. All persons wishing to make public comments will be asked to first state their name and address for the record, and after completing the comment, members of the public will once again be asked to place their microphone on mute. And we thank all of you for your cooperation this evening. With that, if you would, please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. DeMade?
Here.
Mr. Hazen?
Here.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Here.
Mr. Benicki?
Here.
Mr. Emmons?
Here.
Mr. Belovich?
Here.
Mr. Compton?
Here.
Mrs. Volker?
Here.
Mr. Hicksonbaugh?
Here. Approval of the minutes of our regular meeting of October 3rd, 2022. Are there any additions or corrections? Then hearing none, the minutes will stand approved as received from the clerk's office. Petitions, communications, remonstrance, and memorial.
Yes, Mr. President, we have a letter from the City Plan Commission regarding their recommendations from their October 11th, 2022 meeting. Honorable members, a regular meeting of the Mishawaka Plan Commission was held on the above referenced date, at which time the following proposed ordinances were considered. Petition number 2022-17, a petition submitted by Memorial Health Systems, Inc., requesting to rezone the northeast corner of North Main Street and East University Drive from C1 General Commercial District to S2 Planned Unit Development to allow a mixed-use commercial and residential development. The Commission, with a vote of 7-0, recommended approval, subject to the attached conditions. Petition number 2022-18, a petition submitted by Gender Food Services, Inc., requesting to amend the North Main Street Planned Unit Development to allow for a restaurant with drive-through, reduction in number of parking spaces, and the use of fiber cement board at 5540 North Main Street. The Commission, with a vote of 7-0, recommended approval. Pursuant to Indiana Code 36-7-4-605, the Mishawaka Plan Commission hereby certifies to the Mishawaka Common Council the attached proposed ordinance regarding the above matters. This is signed by Carrie Myers, Administrative Planner.
Thank you. A report of special committee. This evening we have none, so we will move into ordinances on first reading.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-37, an ordinance amending Chapter 137 of the Municipal Code of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, as from time to time amended, commonly known as the Zoning Ordinance of 1966 of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana. This is to rezone for from C1 to S2 Planned Unit Development to all mixed-use commercial and residential development, northeast corner of North Main Street and East University Drive.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-37 will be assigned to the Land Use Planning Committee.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-38, an ordinance amending Chapter 137 of the Municipal Code of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, is from time to time amended, commonly known as the Zoning Ordinance of 1966 of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana. This is a PUD amendment for a restaurant with drive-through, reduced parking, and fiber cement board at 5540 North Main Street.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-38 will also be assigned to the Land Use Planning Committee. Resolutions.
Resolution R 2022-29, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, making a final determination and confirming the designation of areas within the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, commonly known as vacant land bound by West Front Street, North Hill Street, West First Street, and North Spring Street as an economic revitalization area and economic development target area for purposes of real property tax abatement for Front Street LLC and/or its assigns.
Thank you. We will now open the public hearing on proposed resolution 2022-29. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, please come forward.
Mr. President, members of council, Ken Prince, the Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of Mishawaka. Tonight, I'm filling in for Mr. Spear, who actually has a vacation this week, so hopefully I won't mess things up for him. The project itself, as was discussed at the declaratory, sorry, it takes a while to get used to the mic. As was presented during the declaratory resolution, the proposal includes a 4-story, 79,000 square foot mixed-use building with ground-level commercial, restaurant space, and residential units. The upper floors will be exclusively residential. The building will include 4,600 square feet of commercial restaurant space for 3 tenants, and between 106 and 109 apartment units, a rooftop deck, and 110-space surface parking lot. The total investment, which is significant, is estimated at $25 million, with construction beginning hopefully this mid-November, with completion in the spring of 2024. As we discussed, the proposed request is for a 5-year abatement on the improvements with a higher than normal annual percentage abatement schedule, starting at 100% the first year and then decreasing 5% annually over the next 5 years. The abatement is identical to the tax abatements that were submitted for the River Rock Apartments on Mishawaka Avenue and approved for the planned Riverwalk Apartments west of Central Park. It was also recently approved for the conversion of the Mishawaka Inn for the Steelhead Apartments. One of the things I have to note is that accurately predicting the values and the tax impacts for abatement requests is always a challenge for us because we have to estimate what the assessed value is, and that's something that we just don't do. So historically, we've used 80% of construction value as the number, so that's the number that was reflected in the letter that was forwarded to you, and I'll go over that in a second. But I just have to say in advance that we know those numbers will likely be high, but we would rather be high in terms of estimating it than low. And for reference, the mill project was a $55 million construction project, and the current assessed value of that property is about $30 million. So they pay roughly $750,000 a year in taxes on the mill project. But here we've used 80% rather than a 60% or other number, again, just to be conservative in terms of what the maximum benefit would potentially be. So using the calculator based on the 2021 tax rate and $20 million as the assessed valuation, it'll have an annual tax bill of $471,580, which means the total tax over the 5-year period would be $2.357 million. The total taxes paid would be roughly a tenth of that at $235,790, and taxes abated would be $2,122,000. Again, I think realistically, we're probably looking at about $1 million to $1.5 million in benefit for this, but for the purpose of this, we wanted to be conservative. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on the calculations and how we put it together.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Prince? Mr. Compton?
Mr. Prince, thank you for that information. Could you tell me how much the Matthews Group paid for that piece of property for Mishawaka? Did you say that?
It's in the development agreement, and I don't, that it was likely $10,000 or $20,000 for the property.
Okay.
It's in that range, Councilman Compton, but I don't have the exact number in front of me.
Okay, thank you. At the last meeting, there was discussion about ongoing environmental issues on site. Are you aware of that, or should I ask Mr. Matthews?
No, so on all the former Unarural properties down there, we expect there to be ongoing environmental, as part of the development agreement. One of the things that we have to do, and I'm just going to ramble for a little bit, so excuse me.
Go ahead.
But, in the last 20 years of marketing that property, we found very early on that unless we provided essentially a comparable greenfield standard for the property, that no developer would be interested in the property. What that means is that the city, on every property that's been developed down there, has taken on the environmental risk associated with the property. And I will use the mill as the example. So the mill, we did detailed borings on the property. They identified a hot spot. We did over $100,000 of mitigation to clear up that hot spot. And then in addition to that, as they were doing the excavation of the property, they encountered additional, what I'd call construction debris that we paid probably close to $200,000 to remediate as part of that 4-acre site. This site is significantly smaller and is also located in an area that doesn't have the history that the mill property had. So we believe that that environmental potential is much less on this property than what was on the mill property. But during the TIF, if you remember the TIF update regarding where we anticipate our cash flow, we allocated $200,000 for potential expenses from this property, knowing that it was probably going to be less, but we wanted to budget high.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, then we are financially responsible for any other mitigation that might be found,
So in
any
the,
other
in
problems
the, in the
that might be
agreement,
found.
in the agreement, we worded, and again, I'm taking this from reference, I don't have that agreement in front of me, but the first $5,000 of mitigation, so if they encounter an old remnant of a basement, that type of thing, they would have to take care of it.
Okay.
So the first $5,000 is their responsibility. Anything above that, up to, I believe it's that $200,000 limit, is our responsibility. And then when you go beyond that, let's say we had some catastrophic thing in the ground that we weren't aware of, then we would deal with either divvying up that cost or it would kill the project.
So the city really is taking the risk on this
We do
as
it on-
opposed to
ye-
the
yes.
developer? That was
Correct.
my question.
Yes.
Thank you. My last question is, I've thought a lot about this, as you know, and talked to you about these things. And I know, I've heard the mayor say that, and I agree, that this is a phase-in of taxes. Okay. Taxes, my thought is, as I was thinking about this, that these taxes are, in theory, calculated to cover the cost of city services. That's what the taxes are about. So putting this another way is they get $2.1 million of city services at no cost.
So we can have a philosophical discussion,
Yeah,
but I'll just go.
I understand.
so-
And maybe this isn't the place.
No, no, no. I think it in fact is this place for it. So if you look at what we're trying to do with tax abatement here is to get this project to the finish line. So right now, when we originally conceived this, as was discussed at the last meeting, we looked at the mill as a major draw to the area. When it was constructed, we had a much higher amount of city dollars that went into that project to encourage additional development to happen. This project was originally envisioned in 2018, and we did not have any discussions on tax abatement until most recently in the last few months because of the change in the economics that have happened nationally or globally that have dramatically increased and made this project on the verge of not happening. That is why the tax abatement has been proposed at this time. And very specifically, tax abatement is one of the few incentive tools that the city has, other than direct input of cash from a tax increment financing district, that we have to make or change in property. And we've marketed this property as part of the Uniroyal for close to 20 years now. It has generated no taxes during that time. And we've consistently held out, thank you to the council and the 3 mayors that I've worked for, that you've all had the vision of holding out for what I consider to be the highest and best use. Nobody was in a rush to say, this has to happen now. We've had other projects, people have come to us say, I want to build single-family homes in this property. And we said, you know what, we like that, but this isn't the right area for it. We want it to be part of the downtown. We think it should be a higher density. We think it should be mixed use. We think it should be architecturally significant. And we think it should be pedestrian friendly. And we've held out for that. And we've worked for the last 4 years, in this case with this developer, to try to get this across the finish line to be constructed. So if the tax abatement does that, I think that has significant advantage because in 5 years, compared to what, if you broke this into 6 single-family homes instead of this development, what would the taxes be that you were generating from that? And you'd have the same amount of sewer in the road, the same amount of roads that you'd have to take care of in terms of city services, but you're going to have a much higher assessed valuation associated with the property based on this development versus a much lower density use. And that's the reason to have the tax abatement and the incentive. And honestly, when we originally conceived this with them, they weren't requesting a tax abatement. It is the change in the economy that is now driving the finances on the verge of either, and I have other projects that have been proposed that you've never seen that I can tell you are not moving forward because of, at least at this time, because of the changes that have happened in the economy. So we've worked on for 4 years on this, and we think this is appropriate to get it over the edge, or we wouldn't be here. And again, I'd feel differently if this weren't city property, developer-driven property, but in this case, we've been working on this for 20 years, it's downtown, and we feel like it's appropriate.
Mr. Prince, I also thought about Joe Citizen in Mishawaka. And while this is a phase-in, in theory, the city services for this project will now be funded by the rest of the taxpayers for that period, or partially, in theory. Help me of what I tell Joe Citizen on the West End or in my district, how this helps them, how this is good for them.
I would very specifically tell them that you are taking assuming you're supporting this, that you're taking a long-term view of what is best for the city. And I would wholeheartedly represent to them that all you have to do is look at the tax revenue from this property over 10 years compared to the zero now, or at a lower density development, and this project will outdo whatever other proposal you would put in there. And I've represented this before, these projects I don't have a bunch of developers that are sitting in the wings waiting to take this property. We do try to work with the developers that come and want to work with us regarding what our vision has been for the property, and we've worked to that end for these last 4 years. So the benefit to the citizens, and I'll use the mill as an example. So the mill is 4 acres of property. It has a whole bunch of city investment in it, but right now it's paying $750,000 a year in property taxes. And a portion of that is the referendum that was passed by Mishawaka Schools. Not all of that is going back in to the TIF district. So that higher assessed valuation greatly helps the other single-family homes because of the higher assessed value that it generates. And again, that's over long term. You're absolutely right. In the short term, that we have to make up whatever services are being provided there. But again, because of the density and the type of project, we're dealing with a population increase there. We're not taking care of any more roads. We're not taking care of any more sewer. Those are already in place based on the location of the property.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Prince? Mr. Mamalenti?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Prince. I heard you reference that this property's been, we've been trying to market this for over 20 years with zero tax dollars collected. Could you tell me how many offers that we've had or developers that have come to us with as strong of a plan that this, Mr. Matthews has?
As strong of a plan, zero.
Zero.
We've had multiple plans presented to us. We've had Bob Stevens, when he originally did the master plan for this, it was a concept plan. It was never brought to a level of where it was going to be funded. The first phases of that was the townhouses and then the 112 building. And then the Great Recession hit, and then that changed hands. We've had multiple developments done on other properties, but typically it's been the draw of the river and the river frontage. And what's unique about this property is it doesn't have any of the river frontage. It's taking advantage of the location downtown, but it's not on the river. We've had other developers look at it, but no one take other properties in this area to the level that they've taken it here.
And to take full advantage of your TIF expertise while you're here, and for some of the folks that are here in the audience and perhaps listening online, could you just Cliff Notes version what, since this is in a TIF, located in a TIF district, with the taxes that we do get collected or phased in, what we can and will do theoretically with the taxes collected within this district?
Right. So the taxes that are collected, so you have a base level of assessed valuation. In this case, because the city has owned it for that period of time, my understanding is it's essentially zero. So the increment of what's captured before development and then after development goes into essentially a capital improvement fund. That's the tax increment financing district that's used to fund sewers and roads, other infrastructure improvements all across the city. We have one consolidated TIF district currently, so it funds basically everything downtown that the city has invested in has come through TIF. It built the Edison Lakes roads, it's widened Main Street, it built the underpass. All that comes from the tax increment financing district, and we use those funds very specifically, so if otherwise, we either would not do capital improvements or it would be separate referendums for each project as part of that.
Just to be a little bit more specific, so it's not like with the funds that we're going to be collecting, we could hire more officers or force responders or outside of this TIF district, correct?
Right, so when we demolished Uniroyal, we placed much of the downtown in the tax increment financing district, which means that increment goes to that tax increment financing and doesn't get distributed to all the taxing units or to the general fund. That's correct.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Prince? Ken, let me follow up on a couple of the points that my colleagues have made. First of all, with regard to Mr. Compton and your discussion, and you used the term greenfield.
I'm sorry, what term did I?
Greenfield?
Yes.
Let's look at it from the opposite perspective. Is it fair to say that in the world of development, that this site and the surrounding area is still viewed as a brownfield site that carries with it some particular challenges with regard to development?
Very much so. And this is because, I mean, they see the potential because of what has happened there, but you can look at any other, all the properties around it, and some are better than others. I look at the, I can say it because they're out of town, but the gas station at the intersection of Spring and Lincoln Way that hasn't seen investment in a very, very long time, that code enforcement has to keep up on regarding the pump house that was done adjacent to it because it continues to rot. It's that level of long-term decay that we are tackling one piece at a time, and by doing developments like this, it encourages more investment over time, and that's one of the reasons why we want to do it. But it's a continued fight. I mean, we're still dealing with the repercussions of having Uniroyal decline over a very long period of time, and the impact that that's had on the housing. As you know, many of the houses down there were broken up into multifamily worker-type housing. Some of them have been converted back to single family. Some of them are well-maintained apartments, and some of them, frankly, aren't. And so we want to continue to address that over time.
So is it fair for us to assume then that there's a connection between what you indicated to Mr. Mamalani was the history of less attractive development proposals for this site and the fact that it's in a brownfield area? Are those separate and distinct factors, or is that interrelated? Potentially.
But potentially they're related. I've never looked at it that way.
Okay.
Every property that you look at has certain limitations and positives and negatives. I'm a fan of Mishawaka. I see nothing but potential. I don't quite have the rose-colored glasses the mayor has, but I'm still there.
But as a general statement, is it more difficult to develop in a brownfield area or a non-brownfield?
100 times more difficult to develop in a brownfield area.
Okay. And I appreciated your answers to Mr. Mamalani's question with regard to TIF. And I think it's important for us to emphasize that point. Is it fair for us to say that if there was no tax abatement with regard to this property that had been requested or that would be approved, that the revenue that would be generated in terms of this new development would still be spent within the TIF district and wouldn't flow into the general fund and other revenue streams outside of TIF for the city?
That's correct. The main TIF expires in 2039, so essentially this will go into the tax increment financing district until 2039 when it's completely gone.
Okay. One of the other things that we heard at the prior council meeting, and it's also reflected in the information that we've received from staff, is that this project was originally scheduled to commence earlier in time, but then it was delayed based upon some requests on the part of the city with regard to some adjustments in the development plan. Is that correct?
That is correct. And COVID also happened in there as well, so that was another delaying factor, I believe, that contributed to
And
the
COVID's
delay.
kind of an equivalent factor that has delayed everybody, and it's across the board. But can you talk a little bit about what it is that the city asked this developer to do that had some impact
Right.
on the time that?
So when we originally conceived this project back in 2018, we had a shared parking area on the south side of where the building was located. Half of it was going to be public and half of it was going to be private. What we asked them to do was similar to what we did on Mill Street and now also on Hill Street, is we asked for additional right-of-way along Hill Street, so we could widen, put the public parking in the street, which would allow them then to make the entire area behind the building to the south private parking. We thought it was a much cleaner and also fit into the plan because we'd already done it to the north better, that it worked better from a public-private perspective.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your help.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Prince? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If so, please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Pat Matthews. I represent the Front Street LLC, and we are the developers of the project. I'm going to kind of repeat some of my notes that I presented in our first meeting and emphasize some others, so I won't go over the product mix. As we talked about originally, this project was scheduled for, or we'd started development, the process in 2018, and back in 2019, it was our original intent to provide a market rate development without any financial assistance. We didn't request anything from READY or city TIF funds, et cetera, and we were ready to go. Our initial pre-COVID construction estimate, not including land, soft costs, and financing, was about $10 million back in 2019. We had already invested significant design expense at this time, and then the city asked us to move the building by about 35 feet for the additional right-of-way that Mr. Prince mentioned there. And the point I want to make is at that time, we had already had significant design expense. The building, we already had renderings done, and the mayor had already presented a rendering at that time in one of his State of the City addresses. Then the city asked us to move it and flip it so that we could accommodate the planned North Hill Street pedestrian expansion, which we were excited about, and we wanted to be a good business partner and a good neighbor, and we went to work to accommodate that request. Then COVID hit, and the dynamics have changed dramatically. We're not comparing apples to apples when discussing the proposed project and the previous project. Since 2019, we've experienced significant cost escalation, not only in terms of labor and materials, but also large increases in the cost of financing. Our most recent construction estimate, not including land, soft, or financing, has greatly increased since the 2019 budget. We believe in the city of Mishawaka, and we want these new market rate units to be built in the downtown area of Mishawaka. I would like to address a couple of points that came up in our first reading. One of the things that I would like to represent is that cash flow is the most important factor in the stability of a project, especially in the early years. Granting a tax abatement is one of the easiest and best ways for a governing agency to support growth and stability in a revitalized and growing urban area. I think Mr. Prince mentioned that also. Tax abatements are an excellent win-win tool, and one of the few tools in your toolbox that work. Please ask yourself, why wouldn't we use these every chance we get? A tax abatement is not a gift to a developer. It's an indirect incentive to a renter to live in Mishawaka. It's a simple formula, cost divided by the number of units. If you are helpful in driving down the costs, you'll be helpful in allowing more residents to populate the downtown area. If you want businesses in the downtown area, first you need housing. We respectfully request that the Mishawaka Redevelopment Commission and the County Council grant our request for a 5-year property tax abatement. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Matthews? Mr. Compton?
Mr. Matthews, thank you, and I appreciate the information you sent, although you didn't send it to the person who asked for it, which is us. You sent it to Ken Prince, so I didn't get it till just about a half an hour ago.
I apologize for that.
I'm looking at the form you filled out, and if I'm reading this right, the estimated value of the property is $337,500?
The current estimated value of the property?
Yeah.
That would be from the, I believe, the property tax records currently.
Okay. And you got that property for $20,000, right?
I would have to revisit.
Somewhere in
the
there,
agreement.
Mr., that's on the high end. Let's say 50,000. That's, okay. You understand the point I'm trying to make, that the city's invested in this already? That's the point I'm trying to make. One of my questions was, let's see. One of my questions was pro forma and profit. You calculate pro forma in profit in the pro forma? I mean, I would think you would. I would think you would want to know so that that would all be part of the calculation of cash flows, and so you understand, so that your investors understand what they're going to receive. Is that calculated in that?
I haven't completed the entire pro forma yet. As I mentioned in my email today, that the pro forma, the primary driver on that pro forma is cash flow. And we're looking to make sure that the bank is satisfied and that we can fulfill our debt ratios correctly.
So it did mention that, that a standard rate of around 8% is what you're looking for. I understand that. And that seems reasonable if I'm an investor risking my money in the investment. And that is 8% of what? 8% of my investment? 8% of, what? Help me out that.
That would be, generally in that formula, it's 8% of invested capital, 8% return on invested capital.
Okay. In today's environment, you mentioned, and I agree with everything you're saying, in that you've had escalated costs in construction and in labor, and you've provided me some of those estimates. I appreciate that. And then the inflation and the interest rates and all the other things that are the financial part of it. Do you see that causing a problem renting space there? If this continues and we enter into a recession, are we going to have trouble renting space in a building like that? Are we getting ahead of ourselves? Should we wait until a better environment to develop that property?
No, I don't believe that we should wait at all. I think that I'm obviously optimistic that the project will be a success and that the economy will certainly turn back around after we may exhibit or have a recession. But I would like to hit the ground running and be prepared when the gates break loose and the economy recovers.
Okay. I guess my last question would be, first of all, I want to tell you, I want your project to be successful. I want you to do what you're doing. I just struggle with the community supporting it through a tax abatement, and that at some point, these projects should stand on their own. And that's my feeling. I understand what you're asking for. I understand why. I struggle with if it's the right thing to do for my constituents, for the people that live in my district. Would you consider, if we pass something less, what would, in a percentages that aren't what you're asking for, is that a big problem? And of course, it depends on what those percentages are, but
Well, if I could, you have a couple questions in there.
go ahead.
So the
Sorry.
first one would be, if I may respectfully, I believe that the council is charged with running the business of the city of Mishawaka. And certainly, there are social requirements and what's the word I'm looking for? The presentation that you're making. And I, again, respectfully, I appreciate the questions, but if I'm very business-oriented and driven, and it's 110% the right thing to do. The property, as Mr. Prince has mentioned, has been sitting vacant for 20 years. And at some point, you might have to ask your constituents, or your constituents might be asking you in 5 years, why is that land still vacant? Why don't I have a nice place to stay? Why don't I have a new restaurant in downtown Mishawaka? Grape Road has it. why don't we have it down here? There's no time like the present, whether you're buying a house at a 7% or a 7.5% mortgage, it's never going to be cheaper than it is today. Even though we've had significant cost escalation, it will still be more expensive tomorrow. A reduction in the tax abatement could kill this project. A delay in this could kill this project.
Thank you, appreciate it.
If I may add one more item. The, Mr. Prince mentioned that the $400,000 is approximately the tax abatement. It's, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's a very simple, I think I mentioned it, it's a very simple formula. If you help drive down those costs, we help bring more parties into downtown Mishawaka. Those parties will want goods and services, businesses will fill the mixed-use space, and you'll have a very vibrant community. There's no time like today to make that decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Matthews? Mrs. DeMade.
Thank you, Mr. President. Hi, Mr. Matthews, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
I read in your Exhibit A that you, was part of our paperwork here, that you had a market study completed in January of 2019 and then updated in June of this year.
Correct.
Who conducted that market study?
A company out of Chicago, Tracy Cross, that is recommended and recognized by several lending institutions in the area.
Okay.
So
And is there a way that we can see that market study?
I'd be happy to share that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Matthews?
I do.
Mr. Compton.
I've got one more. I was looking at this, Mr. Matthews, I was looking at this, the form you sent in, and it, name and location of your 5 largest vendors, and 2 of the construction contractors are on here, and neither of them are local. So that's another concern that I have, that, you know, I understand what you're saying, that this abatement helps the owners. But if the project doesn't happen, these people are going to benefit too. And personally, I'd like to see local contractors on local projects.
We would also like to see local contractors and local vendors. And we would certainly have given several local vendors and contractors the opportunity to bid on the project. Those vendors in that application are not necessarily the vendors that will be on this project. Those are several of the largest vendors that we've used in the past.
Okay. Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward.
Mr. President, members of the council, my name is Stephen Studer. I'm an attorney at law with office at 4101 Edison Lakes Parkway here in Mishawaka, Indiana. I'm here in support of the tax abatement, and one of the things I just passed out were a photograph that I took in about 1999. In 1999, I was honored by the city to represent it in connection with working with the EPA in the state with respect to the contamination issues that were then present at the former Utah Oil facility. The EPA said at that time it was the worst site they had in the entire region. I show you these photos for 2 reasons. One, to show you what was there 20 years ago. And 2, if you look at that site now, how incredible it is. And the city has made a huge investment. The demolition, I also represented the city in the demolition of these 57 buildings. And you may, some of you are probably too young to remember the demolition, but it was quite an event here in Mishawaka, and we tore down, as I said, 57 buildings. And I walked through every one of these buildings, by the way, with my Tyvek suit on, and it was an absolute mess. One of the roles I serve also is an adjunct professor at Notre Dame Law School, and I teach construction development and finance. And I can tell you, Mr. Prince is absolutely correct, that developing a brownfield site is really, really difficult. Whether or not you have actual environmental issues or not is sometimes secondary to the fact that lenders perceive environmental issues. And so when a lender looks at this property, they already get a little glitch because they think, well, this is a problem. And Mr. Prince mentioned the mill project. The mill project also was the beneficiary of over $10 million in other public money, the Regional Development Authority and others. So they would probably not be here without that input of federal, of that state and federal money, or the state money and the city money. And as Mr. Prince also noted, that just like this property, we thought we got all the hot spots back in 1999, 2000, 2001. But when we went to develop the mill, we found another hot spot that cost $200,000. Now, I have looked at the development agreement on this particular property, and there's two issues. One is the ground development, and that is a cap at $50,000, and that means we find debris, et cetera. I would tell you, when the demolition contractor, G.H. Griffin, did this project, they didn't go down any deeper than 4 to 6 feet in terms of columns or anything else. They were trying to get rid of the buildings, and they recycled everything they could, but they didn't go down 15 feet. And that's the risk that the developer has to take. Anything over $50,000 is their risk, not the city's. On environmental issues, the $100,000 only relates to hazardous materials. As Mr. Prince pointed out, a simple hazardous material could run $200,000. That's capped at $100,000. So there's a real risk being taken here by the developer. Anybody who develops on the former Uniroyal site is taking a risk. And this property is still subject to an agreement and covenant not to sue with EPA and the state. There's still a lot of issues outstanding there on that site. So I applaud anybody who's willing to come in and look at the site and develop it, because there are some unknown costs usually associated with such developments. And the other thing I point out, the city spent over, I believe, $12 million in developing the site from what it was in 2000. It would be a shame to see that investment go to waste. We have the opportunity to increase and improve the downtown neighborhood. I live just south of town. My office is in Mishawaka. I visit downtown frequently. We love to see the new development come in. I would hate to see that stymied now and not happen, because we're looking at a 5-year tax abatement. And it's right now generates 0, and in 5 years, it's going to generate a lot of taxes. And it's going to help other businesses come downtown as well. So I very much support the tax abatement and the 5-year request.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Studer? Mr. Compton?
Mr. Studer, thank you for your comments. I'm a little bit confused. I thought I asked Mr. Prince if we were responsible, the city of Mishawaka was going to do all the environmental cleanup, and he said anything over, sounded like there was a $5,000 deductible, so to speak, and anything over that, we were responsible for. Now I'm hearing you
That's
say
not
something
right.
different.
In this particular development agreement, the first $5,000 is by the developer, the next $50,000 is by the city, and anything over that is by the developer. Now, that relates to ground preparation, construction debris, anything else they find, et cetera. They may also have to put vapor control barriers in as well, so that all lays on the developer's cost. So the city is only liable for the $50,000, between $5,000 and $55,000. Anything over that is the developer's
That's for
responsibility.
the construction debris, correct?
Right, that's the ground preparation.
So if they find any contaminated soil, how's that work?
Right, so if there's hazardous materials as defined by the development agreement and by the EPA, the city pays the first $100,000, and the developer pays everything over and above that. As you pointed out, and I don't know what we did with the mill project, whether that was the same development agreement or something different, but there was $200,000 in costs there. So in that case, assuming they had the same development agreement, the city would have paid the first $100,000, and the developer had to pay the other $100,000. So it's capped at $100,000 on the development agreement for hazardous materials. It's capped at $50,000 for other construction debris and other issues with the property.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
And I had the benefit of having the agreement in front of me. Mr. Prince
No,
did not.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Studer? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If so, please come forward.
Mr. President, council members, Dave Wood, Mayor, urging you to support resolution number 2022-29. It's rare, as you know, that the city supports tax abatement in general. I can't remember the last, other than the previous 3 that have come up, the last ones before this. It's been many years, actually. These we only bring to you with our support if we determine that there is a credible need for them. we are not of the opinion that we just give out tax abatements to any project around here. While some may think that that would be a good use, a good practice, we do not. We are very judicious, as we know you are too, in supporting tax abatement. We're even more judicious when it comes to supporting residential tax abatement. And we do so only when we know there are extenuating circumstances. This site certainly qualifies for that. While the developer has asked for a bigger tax abatement, we went with precedent with a tax abatement model that already exists and that you've already seen and in fact approved on other projects. This, as you heard, this project did not receive any other kind of stimulus, whether regional cities or READY or other kinds of support. But as you've also heard, the site has sat empty, non-productive, generating zero for 20 years plus. And in fact, it has generated costs to the city. We already have the grid work around it. The roads we plow and maintain, the property we cut the grass every couple of weeks, every week and a half, whether it needs it or not. Those costs will continue if this is not approved tonight, because we just heard that it is probably likely that this won't go forward if this is not approved due to the extra costs incurred, partially because of the city asking for a delay in the project so that we could make some improvements that benefit our citizens and the development. But when I think about this abatement and this project in general, we are at a critical point downtown. We are trying to build a critical mass. What does that critical mass do for us? Well, it benefits our local businesses right here downtown, whether it's the mom and pop restaurant that these residents will inevitably support. And that restaurant then, by the way, can pay their own taxes and hire their own people and be very productive in whether it's the older part of town or to support growth in a surrounding new part of town. We think that that is vital to a growing community. Think about what we do not get if this project doesn't come about. Well, we lose those income taxes, potentially 100 units full of people with gainful employment. That could be gone if we don't take advantage of this project on this brownfield site that, as you just heard, may need some extra redevelopment work that you don't have to do if you're building a project up north. And if you're building a project up north and asking for an abatement for a residential property, I can promise you that we've met those developers and we've said, no, you won't get our support for that. Now, you can go to the council, but you ain't getting our support. So we have said no to others because we didn't feel like they met the conditions that this group does with this site. When you think about school referenda, those are above any abatements or caps or whatever. So as the school proceeds now to pursue a new abatement or a new referendum, this will pay into that, these residents here. And when you think about what is lost if this is, if this is approved, those initial years where we see less dollars, not much. We're still maintaining the property, but we'll have this project. It will inevitably succeed, we think, based on other projects that have happened around it. It requires a bigger investment to get to the standards that the city expects. But we want housing for all downtown Mishawaka. And this fills a very unique niche. This is right catty corner to affordable housing and senior housing. And it's also right across the street from luxury housing. That's a pretty unique situation to be in, but this provides different kind of housing that fills a different niche, whether it's studio or for entry level, kind of college students that are looking to maybe stay here in a more affordable situation. This provides that, and we want to be in that business of having a community that supports and provides those kinds of housing options. It's a sign of a vital community to be able to even have a project presented like this. And we know that over time, those TIF dollars will help us to provide more community benefit. If this project doesn't go forward, we won't have that. But if it does, then we'll use these TIF dollars to do as we have done, be good stewards of them, put them into public infrastructure projects, public capital projects that benefit our entire community. That's what we've done with TIF. We're conservative and I think good stewards of those dollars. And what does that do when we invest in those kinds of things? Why, that supports our schools. That makes it a community that people may want to actually live in, raise their families in. Those families then support our local schools. And so we use our TIF dollars wisely to the benefit of all, our citizens, our schools, our all of our businesses. And so we think that support of this project only adds to that. No support of this project, quite frankly, means that we'll be mowing the grass for probably another 20 years until something else maybe comes along. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Wood? Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? Please come forward. Then is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Please come forward. I neglected to ask if there is anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed resolution? Are there any council members who wish to speak? Mr. Compton.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you know, I didn't support the last tax abatement. I know how important these are. I mentioned setting precedent at that point. Mr. Mayor said precedent. I know we don't give them to other projects other than in downtown and the one in Twin Branch. So, and at the current rates, I can't support this. So in the sense of compromise, I'd like to make a motion, Mr. President. Make a motion that we amend the ordinance to have it set at 100% the first year, 75% the second year, 50% the third year, 25% for the fourth year for a 4-year tax abatement. And I say that, and I make this motion to set a new precedent going forward for projects similar to this that I think is more acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Compton has made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to amend the proposed resolution 2022-29 to amend the year span or the length of time and the yearly tax abatement amounts. Year 1 would be 100% of an abatement. Year 2 would be a 75% abatement. Year 3 would be a 50% abatement, and year 4 would be a 25% abatement. Any additional questions or comments? Mr. Benicki.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just be curious, before I vote one way or another, on what the dollars are on that versus what we have now. I don't know what the dollars would be. I know what the percentages are, but I don't know the dollars and the effects on the long term, you know, if it's going to be an exuberant amount or a small amount. So I'd like to see some math on that. Thank you.
Mr. Mamalante.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I too would like some information prior to my vote regarding this motion, and I apologize in advance if I have missed it while I was taking some notes, but I would like to ask the developer some questions or what his thoughts would be on this. I know he had mentioned that time and money is of a strong concern that may potentially kill a project. So before I vote one way or another, I would, with your permission, ask him a couple questions regarding his thoughts on that.
Mr. Matthews, if you want to come up to the podium, please, sir. And then, Mr. Prince, in a couple seconds here, I'm going to ask if you can do some quick calculations for us, but it looks like you're already on it. Thank you, sir. Mr. Mammolati.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Matthews, for coming up this evening. And again, like I had mentioned, I apologize if I had missed some of your comments regarding the structure that's previously in front of us and how rigid you are on that while I was taking some notes. So based on Mr. Compton's motion that he has on the table, I know you'd mentioned time and money is a major concern for this project one way or another. So I wanted to get your initial thoughts on that motion.
Well, the project is very thin as it stands right now, and every day we're up against additional Fed funds going up, interest rates rising. I can't speak to the exact numbers that he's talking about. I can just tell you that when I look at the amount of cash flow that we have and meeting our ratios to satisfy the lenders, it's very, very thin. It would be very tight. I can't say for sure one way or the other. It would just be extremely disappointing that we've gotten to this stage and that the goalpost would be moved.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Matthews while we have him at the podium? Thank you, sir. And these, a reminder, these are still questions with regard to Mr. Compton's motion that is on the floor right now. But thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments with regard to Mr. Compton's motion to amend the proposed resolution that is in front of us? Mr. Mammolati.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. And I don't know if this is the proper time, but I'm just kind of going to verbalize some of my thoughts regarding the motion. And it would also be contingent on what Mr. Prince's mathematical skills presents to us here shortly. But I really want this project to move forward. I would hate to jeopardize this potential project moving forward based on a couple $1,000s here or there. So that's only my concern with that motion. So,
Thank you. Mr. Compton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did the quick math. It looks like to me, with the schedule that I proposed, that the taxes being abated over 4 years would be $1.179 million, as opposed to $2.122 million. So that additional amount, so there would be $1.1 million, almost $1.2 million in taxes abated. So that means that taxes paid would be the difference. So it'd be really about $1 million that they would pay in taxes as opposed to the $235,000 at this point. If my math is right, and this was quick, so.
Thank you, Mr. Compton. Other questions or comments from the council? Mr. Harrison.
I guess I have a question. I don't know if Mr. Prince can answer it, but my understanding is it doesn't matter what we do here tonight, the tax money that is gathered in the TIF area is going to stay in the TIF area. It's not going to, when I say this, it's not going to benefit the rest of the community except for what we can do in the TIF area, infrastructure and that type, right?
Mr. Prince.
That is correct, Mr. Hazen. And although my numbers were a little different than Councilman Compton's, it is roughly $1 million difference between the two. So I would look at it because, again, the assessed valuation, what Mr. Compton has presented is 55% of what was recommended by staff. Again, the developer requested significantly more than that. We asked them to reduce it to come into our standards. This would be a reduction in addition to that.
I guess I have one more question too, and I don't know if you can answer this. You're comfortable with the money that we have in TIF, that we can do what we need to do downtown? And I'm sure we want this million, but we don't need it. It's not going to hinder projects.
We have not included the revenue from this property in our TIF cash flow projections. That being said, we never have enough money. If you look at the TIF district, we have $600 million in desires and $300 million in funding until it expires. So, and I'm loosely, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but that is the ballpark of what we're talking about.
Okay. So if this property sat empty for another 20 years,
Again, we're not including any revenue projection from this property in our TIF.
Right,
revenue.
so
We are not counting on this property to fund what we have allocated for improvements over the next 6 years.
I would look at it as what do we gain to lose then, because what are they paying? We're not getting anything now on that property.
Correct.
Zero.
Correct.
Any other questions for Mr. Prince? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Then we are back to questions and comments from the council with regard to Mr. Compton's motion to amend the proposed resolution. Mrs. Volker.
Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate Mr. Compton's thoughts on maybe coming up with a new standard for abatements, but I also have to appreciate our developers' thoughts in that they have been planning on an abatement that also has precedent in other residential abatements that we've done in the downtown Mishawaka area and, of course, the Steelhead project on Capitol. So my argument would be that I think we should stay with the abatement that has been put forward now, and then if, as a council, we want to change that and put a precedent together for residential and industrial abatements, that we do that, but not at this time. So that would be my comment.
Thank you, Mrs. Volker. Any other questions or comments from the council on Mr. Compton's motion? Then I'll echo some of Mr. Mamalani's comments. I appreciate the combined math skills of Mr. Compton and Mr. Prince. But as much respect as I have for those math skills, personally, I'm a little uncomfortable with making a decision of this gravity without having the numbers validated and worked through in real time. So I can appreciate Mr. Compton's concern. I can appreciate the motivation for his motion. But at this point in time, I'm not comfortable amending the ordinance in such a significant fashion on the fly without having those numbers further vetted. Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? Then hearing none, Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council on Mr. Compton's motion to amend the proposed resolution?
Mrs. Demay?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
No.
Mr. Mamalenti?
No.
Mr. Benicki?
No.
Mr. Emmons?
No.
Mr. Belovich?
No.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
No.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
No.
The amendment fails 7-2.
Thank you. Then at this time, we will inquire as to whether there are any additional questions or comments from the council on the proposed resolution that's in front of us. Mr. Mamalenti.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I just want to say thanks to my colleagues in the administration for the caution and the pause that they put forth in every abatement that comes across their desk and our desk as well. I think we're being good stewards of the taxpayers' money. I know at the last meeting I had shown some caution and some pause with this project and the abatement. I did some reflection based on, God bless you, based on some presentations this evening. I keep going back on the fact that this property over the last 20 years has collected 0 tax dollars. And the fact that it's very difficult to sell and develop and get developers to come forward to develop on a property that has some past contamination. As we had mentioned before, the taxes that are going to be collected will stay in that TIF district. It's not like we can pay our employees additional money or bring additional officers or firefighters on payroll with this money, and it will not get released back into the general fund. I'm trying not to be hung up on the taxes, the amount of taxes that will be abated, but rather I'm focusing on the fact that at year 6, the city will collect approximately $470,000 of new taxes into the city per year. And that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money and a lot of projects that the city could potentially start or complete without dipping into the pockets of the taxpayers' dollars. So with all that being said, I'll be voting in favor of this evening.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Mrs. Volker?
Thank you. I just wanted to say, and I know I said this the other day or a couple weeks ago, but I really appreciate developers like you, Mr. Matthews, coming here and being willing to take a risk and make an investment in the city of Mishawaka and in a piece of property that's challenging, but also a piece of property that's in my district, so it's very close to my heart. And it's something that honestly I've been hoping for since my husband and I moved here in 1991. So we've been waiting, like many, many people in the area, for our downtown to be resurrected, so to speak. And when you think about the businesses, so as an example, you have Sun King that came in, or you have any of the restaurants or the retail that has struggled so much in downtown Mishawaka. When you bring in people that are here, that live here, that can support those local businesses in our downtown area, as the mayor said, that's what makes a vibrant community, and I'm really hopeful, and I believe it'll happen, that when you bring another 100 people in here, and then if the Mill 2 goes through and you bring another 100 people, you've got a critical mass of people that are really going to support our downtown area, and I think that that is phenomenal. I think it'll be a very vibrant community, and it'll bring tax dollars to the city that will allow us to support more police officers, our schools, so many different things. So I just wanted to say thank you for making that investment, because I think in the long term it's going to be very substantial for the city of Mishawaka.
Mr. Compton?
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to apologize to my fellow councilmen for not doing a little more homework before the meeting. But these are presented to us as they are. This is the time to set the precedent, right here. And what we're doing is now extending that precedent one more project. And it's going to be that much harder to say no to the next group. So I ask our administration for abatements like these, that we get this, I realize we get it in our packet and whatnot a few days ahead. But I'd like to know, I'd like the opportunity to critique this a little bit more and give opinion and maybe even other options. If you go with this, this is what happens. If you go with this, this is what happens in your presentation to us, so that we're not scrambling at the last minute. But I apologize. I could have asked for that information, and I failed to. And I didn't really even think about it until right now. So that's what I ask. I am not going to support this. I don't think it's in, I think there's a lot of people that are going to be putting off projects because of this economy. I'm a little bit concerned that we want to build this because of where it's at and what it means to kind of all of us. It's kind of wearing a crown. And I'm just not sure those are the reasons to do that. And if it needed to be scaled back or wait, then that's what needed to happen. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the council? Then again, I appreciate all the information that's been provided to us in writing and here this evening at the end of yet another public hearing. It's all been very beneficial. I will tell you that one of the information that we've received, there are at least two components that I've found to be very unpersuasive. The first is the general narrative with regard to the market forces that are at play here with regard to this development. That's a reality. We're all experiencing inflation. The city is experiencing inflation, as is every other developer in the community. And if that was the rationale for granting a tax abatement, then everybody who is getting ready to break ground in the city of Mishawaka ought to be entitled to a tax abatement, because their construction costs have risen at the same level as is applicable to this development. So that general inflationary pressure I find to be very non-persuasive. I also think that the emphasis in the dialogue with regard to precedent is somewhat misplaced. I'll go on record as saying I don't feel bound by anything that was done in the past. We do not, as other communities have in place, we don't have in place an ordinance that assigns each and every tax abatement to a matrix and a rubric and applies a score to it. I believe that one of the strengths that has rounded out our ability to be judicious with granting tax abatements, as Mayor Wood referenced, is that we've looked at them on a case-by-case basis, and we've considered the merits. And the fundamental first step always has to be to look at the site itself. And I do think that there's a danger at times that we become excited by the fact that it's a beautiful development like Mr. Matthews, and I think we lose sight of those fundamentals. What is it about this particular piece of property that makes it difficult to develop? And does the totality of the benefit justify the deduction? The precedent here is a case-by-case precedent. And in my opinion, nothing that we do tonight ties our hands with the next request that comes across our desks. Nothing that has done in the past ties our hands. Quite frankly, if we were really going to look at precedent, the numbers that are embedded in this resolution don't reflect what I understand to be the most recent precedent, which is the Riverwalk precedent that had numbers amended on the floor of the council that are different than what is in front of us. So I think that we need to be careful about how we're treating that concept of precedent. And it is always appropriate to be able to establish and announce whatever we've done in the past, we have a new vision, we're going to be guided by the law, but we're not going to be constrained by what has happened in the past. What causes me to slightly lean in favor of voting for this is a series of other factors on the other side of the ledger, though. As has been noted, this is within a TIF district. And it doesn't mean that we can ever be cavalier with regard to the impact of a tax abatement within the TIF district. But the reality is that even if this tax abatement is not granted, the new tax revenue, if this is even built, will not flow into the general fund of the city of Mishawaka. It will not impact and lower the tax rate paid by any resident. Any money generated is always going to be captured within that district until 2039. So what we're talking about is our ability to be able to bond and to fund projects, and at times what we do within the TIF district is going to delay the priority of certain projects, but this is revenue neutral to a certain extent with regard to how it impacts the residents throughout Mishawaka. What it does do is it allows for a $25 million investment to be made in a brownfield site and to bring in that potential income tax revenue that Mayor Wood referenced, which is ever more a source of important revenue for us as we build out our budget and as we look at what we can do as a community to build amenities, to hire staff, to pay them well, to do the things that we all want to do. So on balance, all the other factors aside, I do believe that that $25 million investment in what is still a difficult brownfield area that not every developer will want to tackle, the benefit outweighs the potential downside of the tax abatement. So I will be voting in favor of this evening, but I do think that Mr. Compton's comments are well taken. I think that we need to engage in a broader dialogue with the administration so that we can speak with one voice as much as possible when these requests come to us. And this is no criticism of anything that's happened this evening. Quite frankly, my individual preference would have been for us to start out at 5 years and a 50% abatement. But that's just a starting point. And undoubtedly, Mr. Prince would have good points to raise that would convince me that I was off base. But that type of interactive dialogue, I think we need to have. So let's put precedent aside. Let's look at things with a fresh set of eyes, and let's look at the realities now and what best serves the future of Mishawaka. That's an issue for another day. This evening, I'll be supporting this resolution. Are there any other questions or comments from the council? The hearing none. Madam, I call for the question.
Question?
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
No.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
The resolution passes 8-1. Resolution R 2022-30, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, making a final determination and confirming the designation of areas within the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, known as 1811 North Home Street, as an economic revitalization area for purposes of real property tax abatement.
Thank you. We'll now open the public hearing on proposed resolution 2022-30. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward.
Mr. President, members of the council, Ken Prince, Director of Planning and Community Development. The proposal before you this evening, the confirming resolution for Helios Hydraulics, who recently acquired Damon Products at 1811 North Home Street. They're looking at a planned investment of $16.3 million. $4.8 million of that is adding on to the building, approximately 53,000 square feet, and $11.5 million primarily for new manufacturing equipment and a little bit into the IT area as well. So that's the two different abatements that you have before you. So the 5-year on real property and then 5-year on personal property with higher percentages on the personal property based on the higher level of investment. Overall, Helios is looking to retain 139 employees while adding an estimated 73 jobs as a result of the investment. The hourly wage for the 71 skilled new positions, excluding benefits, is estimated at $19.17 an hour. The 2 salary positions is estimated at $42.34 per hour. The total annual salaries for the new jobs is estimated at approximately $3 million. As we recommended in line with our tax abatement history, the 5-year abatement for both the real and personal property tax abatements. The real property is recommended at our standard 180, 60, 40, and 20% over that 5-year span, and the personal property recommended at 100, 90, 80, 70, and 60 over that 5-year span. Using the tax calculator based on the 2021 tax rate, the real property improvements proposed would have a corresponding estimated tax bill of $115,200, using 80% of the project construction cost to determine the assessed valuation. The real property taxes associated with the project over the 5-year amount equates to $576,000. Over that period of time, the owner would have $345,600 abated and would pay $230,400. The personal property tax abatement over that 5 years amounts to $1.38 million of property taxes, and over that period of time, the owner would have $1.104 million abated and would pay $276,000. Again, we are very excited on this proposal. As I've said multiple times, is our growth in industry in the city because of our geographic position and available land. It's been difficult to grow our tax base on the industrial side, so this represents real diversity in our economy. It represents manufacturing jobs, which are shipping products that exceed or go outside of the region, and for those reasons, we are very much in support of this request. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Prince? Mr. Compton?
Yeah, Mr. Prince, thank you. The number you quoted, 1.4 million, is that the combined? What I saw was,
It's 1.38.
So on the personal property, which is the equipment, we have 1.38 million over the 5-year period as a
Okay.
total tax bill. And for the real property, the building expansion, we have it at $576,000.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Prince? Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If so, please come forward.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President. I'm Dave Mishler. I'm the outgoing president of Damon Products. So as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, and just thought I'd reiterate here tonight, the reason we chose to partner with Helios was specifically due to their commitment to growth and what that growth would do to our employees, both existing and then the area for new employees. We have a different model as far as manufacturing. We desire to hire unskilled labor, and we basically hire for character, work ethic, and then we like to train them ourselves. So these tax savings will really help us invest in training and become really, we would like to be the employer of choice for people, as an example, that choose not to go to college but just want to get into a nice company, which we have really dozens of employees who have been here 20 to 30 years or even longer. So this really is all about growth. And the new company really means business on growth. We already have contracted with a local contractor to start the addition, hopefully soon after this gets approved. So really, we just feel very strongly that this is a good thing for the community. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If so, please come forward to the podium. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? Is there anyone with us this evening who wishes to speak in opposition? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Thank you. Are there any council members who wish to speak? Mr. Compton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will support this tax abatement. This is what I think tax abatements are about. There are going to be, if I remember reading this right, somewhere around projection of 70 jobs that will be added. I know people that have worked there, and it's a desirable place to work. They make good money. They learn a skill, and I think this is what tax abatements should be about. When I add it up, it looks like we're at just short of $2 million that we will be abating. And after what we just did, I think this is $2 million well spent. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council? Hearing none, then I'll call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Resolution passes 9-0. Resolution R 2022-31, a resolution of the Common Council, City of Mishawaka, Indiana, making a final determination and confirming the designation of areas within the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, known as 1811 North Home Street, as an economic revitalization area for purposes of personal property tax abatement.
Thank you. We'll now open the public hearing on proposed resolution 2022-31. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, please come forward. And if those speakers wish to incorporate by reference their comments with regard to the earlier resolution, they are welcome to do so to try to speed the process along.
Mr. President, Ken Prince, Director of Planning and Community Development, and that's exactly what I was looking to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prince. Any questions for Mr. Prince? Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed resolution, if you would, please come forward. And we'll note for the records that the earlier comments on behalf of the Developer and owner of the facility will be incorporated by reference in this portion of the public hearing as well. Is there anyone else physically present who wishes to speak in favor? Please come forward. Is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone with us this evening then who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed resolution? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Thank you. Are there any council members who wish to speak? Mrs. Volker.
Thank you. Just quickly, want to, again, express my appreciation to both the current owner of Damon and the new owners that are willing to make an investment in Mishawaka. We really appreciate it. And as I said before, I also know people that work there that really enjoy the company, and thank you very much for the investment.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the council? Well, again, I'll be in support of this, and it is not only for those job retention and increased figures that Mr. Compton cited, but it's also because of the unique area in which this facility is located. My guess would be that it would be difficult, if not impossible, to develop that site at that location in this day and age if it hadn't already been built. And the ability to be able to maintain that presence in Mishawaka and the jobs that are of benefit not just to the employees but to the community is worth the investment in my mind and qualifies under the statute. So thank you for the investment you're making and your commitment to Mishawaka. With that, if there are no other questions or comments, I will call for the question.
Question?
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMaid?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Bednicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Resolution passes 9-0.
Ordinances on second reading.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-32 is the Civil City Budget and Tax Levy for 2023 as amended.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Yes, Mr. President. The members of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, your Committee on Budget and Finance, to whom I've referred the matter of proposed ordinance number 2022-32, they report that they have examined the said matter, and in their opinion, it should be presented to the council as a whole. This is signed by the entire committee, and I move for its acceptance.
Second.
Thank you. A motion has been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll now move into second reading and public hearing on proposed ordinance 2022-32 as amended. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward to the podium.
This is actually a vote only. You do not have to.
Thank you for the reminder. It is a vote only. With that, we'll open the floor to any questions or comments from the council.
It's okay, we had eye contact.
All right. Well, then again, thank you to Mayor Wood and the controller for the work that they did to put the budget together. It is always a daunting task, but it's impressive to me that in this economy, as we've talked about this evening, that we have in front of us a balanced budget that allows us to continue to provide high-quality services on behalf of the citizens of Mishawaka. Clearly, there is a need for us to dig into our surplus to do what we want to do within this budget, as Mayor Wood mentioned the last time around, but this allows us to get through the next year in good shape and not just tread water, but thrive as a community. I also appreciate the fact that within this budget, there is that increased spending in public safety. We talked about, and Mayor Wood referenced last time, the investment in public safety personnel that's being made, but I don't think we can overemphasize the fact that we are on the cusp of putting in place a fourth ambulance. Some of us who have been here a while remember when we brought on board a third ambulance. Now we're on the cusp of a fourth, which will provide even better service to the community. And then I think it's safe to say that one of the issues that really is of critical importance to the council that's embedded in this ordinance, and this really came up in our budget meetings, the continued investment that we're making in the camera system along the Riverwalk and in our parks. I think it's safe to say that we as a council view that to be an important component of public safety in Mishawaka, and we appreciate the investment and the ongoing care that's going to be given to that proposal as well. I do agree with one of the suggestions that was made by Mrs. Volker during our budget meetings. Although we've made an investment in beefing up our code enforcement department by adding a staff member in last year's budget, and it appears to be paying dividends, I do think that it makes sense for us to consider, as our finances and our staffing allow, to consideration of a rental inspection program to allow us to try to more comprehensively review those type of issues throughout the city. As a companion piece, we also had a discussion during the budget meetings of a review of our code enforcement ordinances to see if we have empowered the administration and code enforcement with all the tools that they need to address those type of issues throughout the city. And certainly, we as a council would be willing to partner with the administration on any of those such changes that need to be made. But again, thank you to everybody who had a role in bringing us to this point. Thank you to the council members who devoted their time to sit through the budget meetings. But the good news for the citizens of Mishawaka is that we have a balanced budget that will allow us to move into 2023 in good shape and continue the positive momentum that we've experienced in Mishawaka in recent memory. So with that, if there are no other questions or comments, I will call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Beninky?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton? Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hicksonbach?
Yes.
Proposed ordinance number 2022-34, an ordinance fixing the salaries of certain elected officials of the city of Mishawaka, Indiana, for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2023.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Yes, Mr. President, to the members of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, your Committee on Budget and Finance, to whom was referred the matter of proposed ordinance number 2022-34, report that they have examined said matter and that, in their opinion, should be presented to the council as a whole. This is signed by the entire committee, and I move for its acceptance.
So moved.
Thank you. A motion has been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any additional questions or comments from the council? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We'll now move into the second reading and public hearing on proposed ordinance 2022-34. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward to the podium. See, I got it right this time. We are actually having a public hearing on this one.
Mr. President, council members, Dave Wood, Mayor, here to speak in favor of proposed ordinance number 2022-34. This is the elected officials' salary ordinance, which we are requesting a 3% increase for all elected officials in the city of Mishawaka.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Wood? Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? If you would, please come forward. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Is there anyone here with us this evening who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed ordinance? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any council members who wish to speak? If not, then I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Beninky?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hicksonbach?
Yes.
Proposed ordinance passes 9-0. Proposed ordinance number 2022-35, an ordinance fixing the salaries of all employees of the city of Mishawaka, except sworn public safety, Mishawaka Park Department elected officials, and the Mishawaka Utilities for the city of Mishawaka, Indiana, for the year beginning January 1st, 2023.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Yes, Mr. President, to the members of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, your Committee on Budget and Finance, to whom was referred this matter of proposed ordinance number 2022-35, report they have examined said matter and that in their opinion it should be presented to the council as a whole. This is signed by the entire committee, and I move for its acceptance.
Second.
Thank you. A motion has been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll now move into the second reading of public hearing on proposed ordinance 2022-35. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, please come forward.
Mr. President, council members, Dave Wood, Mayor, again here to speak in favor of proposed ordinance number 2022-35. This is the setting the salary for the civil city employees that you've heard, excluding several key groups. We are again requesting a 3% increase for the vast majority of all of our civil city staff. There are some exceptions to that. As you know, we did do a salary study. We wanted to make sure that we're paying fairly for similar duties than maybe some of our peers around the state of Indiana. And so we commissioned a study to see where we are in comparison to most. And what we found out was that by and large, we're in good shape as far as paying what our peers are paying. We did have some outliers, and so we have chosen to address some of those outliers. There are about 8 employees that will receive beyond that 3% because they were essentially below the external rate of what some of our peers pay. And so with them being in some cases 10% below or 11 or even 12% and less, we have chosen to bring those up to the median, to the low standard, and we're doing that over the course of 2 years. And so we're going to increase we're requesting that those be increased over a 2-year period starting this next year, 2023. Some examples of these positions are senior planner. They were below the low external by 10.3%. The redevelopment department's project coordinator was 8% below the low median. HR assistant director was 11.4% below the low external study. In the police department, the detective secretary was 11.4%. The office manager was 7.4% below. Over in central services, motor vehicle highway, our office administrator there was 12.1% below the low external. Clerk's department, the chief deputy clerk was 5.5% below. The controller's office, the deputy controller was 5.8 below. We do also have 2 positions that we are changing the job, essentially the job title. And so we have one in the building department. It's an office manager position, in which case we are proposing a permit tech, more in line with the duties of this person. That will move that into a new salary with the new title, as well as in the controller's office, we have a proposed title for a senior purchasing agent that will essentially give a new salary for a new title for a person who's already working in the department. As I said, by and large, a lot of our salaries are within the ranges. We have nothing to hide with our salary ordinance. We have had requests for that, and we have distributed that to our departments as well as the council was the first to see it. One of the things that I was particularly, at least gratified or at least happy to see was that most of our collective bargaining units are within the norms of what others around the state are making. And so while this takes into account specifically salary only, one of the things that it does not take into account, but one thing that I know we excel at is benefits. Our benefit package is second to none. Our healthcare insurance, we pick up about 98% of the costs of our employees, who pick up just a couple of percent. We also have access to clinics, free prescriptions, free visits to doctors. We pay into retirement where other communities rarely do that. So we put in PERF contributions that benefit our employees in the long term. We also put in deferred compensation and match some deferred compensation as well. When you look at my perspective on compensation and salary, it goes beyond just pay today. I look at a package that is good for our staff, good for their families, good for their longevity, as long as they want to work for the city of Mishawaka, with good benefits, good training, good access to equipment at a good pay scale. And I feel confident that we're able to do that. Do I wish it were more? I absolutely do. I read an article today from Bloomberg that predicts a 100% chance of a recession within the year. Now, is that going to happen? I don't know. They say 100%. Who knows? But the headwinds are there taking us into a recession. We do know that. We understand that inflation is going up and that staff wants cost of living. Our cost of living has gotten a lot worse over the past course of the past couple of years. That is our expenses for things like fuel, our expenses for things like new equipment, on and on and on. All of our expenses are going up. Our ability to pay for it is not going up. We do not get a cost of living raise from our ratepayers, which are our taxpayers. We don't get that. And so while, Mr. President, you mentioned we are spending in deficit, we will continue to spend in deficit this year, and that's a scary place to be heading into a recession. Now, last year, we proposed a 2% raise, and we ended up taking it to a 5% raise based on what was negotiated out of the public safety contracts. I was happy to do that for our staff, and so what was proposed at 2% did go to 5%. We cannot continue to do that. So it's just the reality of where we find ourselves now in our budget condition being what it is. But again, based on what we're seeing in the news, based on what we're hearing from local employers, who we know some are going into shutdown status for extended periods of time, meaning people will go through these holidays without pay for an extended period of time. We're not going to be in that position. We are, again, here to provide good, decent jobs for our outstanding public servants as long as they want to work here. If we take ourselves and maybe go beyond our comfort level and give bigger raises than what we know we can sustain, at some point in time, we're going to have to be talking about, okay, what does it look like when we make cuts? I don't want to ever be in that position. I've been in that position on an employee side, and it is not good. It's not good for families. It's not good for just our dedicated staff who have given so much to the city. So we don't want to be there. So that means that slow and steady wins the race. We're able to provide good employment opportunities for our staff. And I think that this proposal does exactly that and is sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Wood? Mr. Mayor, thank you for the information and for the work that went into this as well. And this ordinance itself, it really is geared toward those salary and hourly wage components of compensation. But since you mentioned insurance, and I appreciate Mr. Belovich asking the question at the prior hearing on the budget with regard to the amount that we pay, and you've reiterated it again. I'm not aware of any employers in this community that are paying in excess of 90%, and 80% is much more of a standard or below. So certainly that is an additional benefit. But with regard to health insurance itself and increased costs for employees in the coming year, somewhat more of a budget issue, but since we're talking about all things finance and compensation in nature, what type of insurance premium increases are our employees anticipated to have to take on in the coming year?
So we do not and will not raise premium levels for our staff coming into this year. Now, that's a pretty impressive feat for our controller's office, for our HR staff, who try to manage our program to contain costs and keep them in line so that we're not, so that, first of all, we don't have to pass along insurance increases to our staff, and the city doesn't have to absorb big increases. They've done an outstanding job in doing that, and so we will not pass those along. And I would say that you're right about most communities, you pay maybe 80% for insurance. We have the best insurance you will find anywhere in this community. And if we were to take it down to that 80% level, you're talking a substantial pay decrease for our staff. If we were to just say, you know what, we're not going to pay that. Right now, we're able to do it. We think it's the right thing to do because, as I said, we want a comprehensive compensation package for our staff because, we want to look just beyond their paycheck. We want to give them good benefits that include health insurance and a good retirement. Pensions, where do you go and find a pension anymore out in the workplace? You don't unless you're working here or at another local government. But those are promises made, and we go beyond the promise made by contributing to that retirement on our own. And so while younger workers may not appreciate it now because they want the bigger paycheck, at some point they're going to come and appreciate that, and that's been our experience over time.
Well, pleased to hear that. I'm sure we all are. And if memory serves, this is not the first year that we have absorbed any increases, or there hasn't at least been an increase that employees have seen. I want to say we're 2 or 3 years into that cycle, if memory serves.
We have. I can't remember, Becky, the last time we increased. It's been several years. And again, another rarity. You won't find that anywhere out in the workplace.
Absolutely. And then not so much a question, but a comment. We've had some discussion, state of the city, other venue, other opportunities. I was going to say in these chambers, but it would have been in the old council chambers with regard to ARPA. And we've recently approved some funding with regard to some non-city employee expenditures of those ARPA funds. But my hope would be that we could continue to take a look at whatever flexibility we have within our remaining ARPA funds to revisit those concepts of employee bonuses. And I know you've always been in favor of that as well. So as we wrap up the year and we look at where we're at with ARPA, I think from a council standpoint, we'd certainly be open to having that discussion as well.
Thank you. And we're open to looking at that for sure. We have done that on 2 separate occasions. Again, sets us apart from anywhere else that you will care to look at. But we felt like it was the right thing to do for our staff, who, by the way, never phoned it in during a pandemic. Reported to work, ready to do the service that we were all elected and obligated to do, and did it just in an incredible fashion. So we felt like that needed some rewarding during a pandemic, and so we've done 2 separate occasions and certainly open to looking at a 3rd.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mayor Wood? And thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? If you would, please come forward. Then is there anyone who is participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Is there anyone with us this evening who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed ordinance? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed ordinance? Are there any council members who wish to speak? Then hearing none, I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. Demade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Proposed ordinance passes 9-0. Proposed ordinance number 2022-36, an ordinance fixing the salaries of all sworn public safety officers for the city of Mishawaka, Indiana for the year beginning January 1st, 2023.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Yes, Mr. President, to the members of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, your Committee on Budget and Finance, to whom was referred the matter of proposed ordinance number 2022-36, report that they have examined said matter and that in their opinion should be presented to the council as a whole. This is signed by the entire committee, and I move for its acceptance.
Second.
A motion has been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll now move into second reading and public hearing on proposed ordinance 2022-36. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward.
Mr. President, council members, Dave Wood Mayor here to speak in favor for now in support of proposed ordinance 22-36. Right now, it's held at 0. It will not stay that way, but it is at 0 just because we're in the middle of negotiations, contract negotiations with the police department as well as economic openers with both police and fire. And so as you are involved in those, you know how intricate and time-consuming that can be, but we will, with full confidence, have that wrapped up and to you for changes before the end of the year, for sure.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Wood? Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? If you would, please come forward. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition? And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any council members who wish to speak? I will only note for the record that at our most recent negotiations with both the police and firefighters, we did advise them that this matter was on the agenda and that this 0% was embedded in the ordinance in order to allow the collective bargaining process to continue, so they're well aware of that, and this will not take them by surprise. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, then I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. Demade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Proposed ordinance passes 9-0.
Privilege of the floor. At this time, members of the public are invited to speak with regard to non-agenda items only under privilege of the floor.
I know you guys seen me a few months ago. My name's Connie Johnson. I live at 1719 Panama Street. I live by the old Southwest Little League. I forget what it's called now, maybe Mishawaka Little League or city property actually is what I think is referred to now, because there's no Little League involved back there.
If I could stop you for a moment, could you either move closer to the microphone or move it closer to you? We're having at least I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Sorry, yeah, I don't
That's
talk
much
about
better.
it.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I know you guys have the city, I don't know who signs the contract with the people that run the Little League. But I know I was told they broke the contract because they let for-profit teams play down there. But one thing I think you guys might have missed is that there's no water down there. They have no running water down there. So for this Little League to make any money off concession stands like a lot of Little Leagues do to help fund and help keep their diamonds up, they don't have the opportunity to because they have no running water down there. So the city signed a contract with this Little League, with East End, I believe, Little League, to have use of this field and these diamonds without the use of water, to maintain their fields, to be able to open a concession stand so they can make money outside of having a profit team come in and play. I love seeing, I don't care who the teams are, I love seeing teams down there. I know I don't understand the difference between a traveling team, for profit, and Little League. I don't get what the traveling league's about. That's beyond my years of playing Little League down there. I played down there from age 9 to age 18. Then I coached, and then I umpired. When I had no kids involved down there, I was involved in that Little League for a good 5 to 6, 7 years after I aged out. I hate the idea to see this go to Habitat for Humanity. I love what they do. I love their concept. I just don't want to see 80 houses built behind my house. That's a lot of houses for a small area. And I'm going to do everything I can to try to get the 9 of you to vote against it. I just don't want to see that happen. My boss, her daughter plays for St. Pius softball team. It's a elementary grade. It's Catholic, so anyways, they go up through 8th grade. They had to go way over in South Bend somewhere for practice because they didn't have a field to practice on. Why can't we open these diamonds up to all the schools, let them practice down there, let them play games down there, instead of having to go so far? When my nephew played baseball for St. Pius, we drove down to Lakeville for games because they didn't have a local diamond to play on. Now, granted, I don't know if they went asked for they could play here. Why not open this to other opportunities for kids to play down there? I talked to a parent from the travel team. He's got a 10-year-old boy that plays on a travel team, and they came all the way from New Carlisle just to practice on this diamond so his son could play ball. That's a long way to travel every week for his son to play ball. Another thing is we had Habitat for Humanity had a meeting. I can't remember how long ago. I lose track of time and dates, but a couple weeks ago I went to, and a guy that used to be president of Southwest Little League was there. He said he signed a 99-year contract with Mayor Buter, and no one has that contract. I'd like to know if the city is aware of that and if they would know where that could be found at. I don't personally know. I'm sure with it being a president of the Little League, you always change the presidents from year to year. It's not always the same president down there. So hard telling where that copy for the Little League went because there's so many presidents after him. But according to what I was told, I honestly don't know because I don't know who they asked, who they talked to, but I guess the city can't find that contract anywhere. I'm just asking for maybe your guys' help, maybe look for that contract to see if there is a legit contract and if you guys can find it to help keep that area a Little League. And other concerns I have is we can't get police out there now. Granted, the calls the last call that my neighbor and I made, we made 4 calls in one day. Granted, it wasn't life-threatening, and I know you guys are short on police officers, but what if it is life-threatening, and what if there's just something bad going on? You got 80 more houses back there that they want to build, and we don't have enough cops in our area to cover us now. How are you going to be able to cover our area with more cops, with more houses? I don't want to cut down the police because I know they're shorthanded. I know a lot of things has happened with this pandemic and, you know, all the things that police officers are accused of doing when they, you know, they're just trying to protect us as citizens. I love our police officers. You know, I know they protect me and they do their best. But I do have a concern about that. And as I stated the last meeting, my biggest concern is I'm going to lose my house if that place goes back there. Because I will not be able to afford my property taxes. And I will lose my house to you guys because of my property taxes. And that property's been in my family since 1955, somewhere around there. And I don't want to lose that because of property taxes. And people try to tell me, well, your property taxes won't go up. Yes, they will. They won't build $250,000 houses back there. My property taxes will go up. My property won't be worth $250,000, but they will still go up. And every year, I fight my taxes. And they come down a little bit for me. Not where I want them to, but they still come down every year for me. But I will not be able to stay there and live there, and I don't want that.
Well, thank you for your comments. Before I ask my colleagues if they have any questions, I will tell you that other than what we've heard from you at a couple council meetings and then some email traffic that we received as recently as today, there still has not been anything introduced to the council for us to take any action that has any relevance at all. And no, we've not been asked to do anything with regard to Southwest Little League.
I do know that Habitat Humanity's been having meetings. Mr. Emmons is having a meeting this Thursday, I believe, at St. Babel's for his district, and he has invited the CEO for that guy. I know it's just in works, but I'm doing everything I can to let you guys know that I just, I don't want it.
Understood, and we appreciate the update, and, please stay in contact with us. I just want you to know, again, for the record, nothing has been asked of us to approve that has anything to do with Southwest Little League. What's happening outside of these chambers, we haven't formally been made aware of. Well, we're certainly happy to try to help you as we can with regard to any type of contract that may or may not have been signed by Dave Yates and, former Mayor Buter way back when. The administration may have a copy of that. The only way that we would have a record of it is if it would be in the records of the city clerk, and I doubt that it would be, given what we're talking about here. I'm hesitant to believe that it would have been anything that came before the council. If so, we'll look to see, but I'm really skeptical about whether we have anything.
Well, I kind of figured that. I mean, I didn't know who else to turn to, where to turn. I was going to talk to Mr. Emmons about on, Thursday for his guidance, his help too.
Sure.
I'm just trying to protect our area, our homes. Like I told, then the guy from Habitat, he was real nice. He came out and talked to us about our concerns and, talked to my neighbor and I, some of my neighbors and I. And, I told him, I said, I look out my kitchen window right now and I see green hills. I see a fence, but that's okay because there's kids playing ball in that fence. Not a big deal. I'm going to lose that view. All I'm going to see is 80, well, I won't see all 80 houses, but going to be 80, he said wants to build 80 houses in that small area. And so that means they're going to be on top of each other, in my opinion, especially if he wants to build a park and other things back there. It's just a lot to do it, in that small area.
Well, I would encourage you to stay in touch with Mr. Emmons. I know that you've had some conversation, or at least I believe that you have had some conversation with Mr. Prince and the mayor, so it's good to stay in contact with them as well. We're certainly happy to help as we can, but again, nothing has been asked of us to this point in time.
Well, I knew that.
Okay.
It's just that I know I have to have all 9 of your votes, and if Mr. Emmons is the only one that's hearing anything about it, I want to keep you guys updated.
We appreciate that.
So.
Any additional questions or comments from the council? Mr. Emmons.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you. I have been out and talked to some of your neighbors.
Yeah.
And I've invited them to our meeting, which is next Thursday, which representatives from Habitat Humanity will be there. And you keep saying 80 homes. I have not been told about any amount of homes.
Yeah, that's what
So
he
I
was
don't
saying,
know.
that's what he was saying in his meeting.
Yeah.
And he says, well, if, he told us like, well, we can cut down to 40 if we have to.
Well, nothing has been addressed to me about the number of homes.
Yeah.
I've had one meeting with them when they came to me and asked if they could come to my meeting and make a proposal that Notre Dame architectural students have developed, but nothing has been said, nothing has come to this council, nothing has been basically to the mayor's office of what he would propose and that. Nothing has been brought to me personally as a representative of that area and that. So this meeting on Thursday is just a proposal. Nothing is set in
Okay.
stone. Nothing is going to be
Right.
passed, nothing's going to be voted on.
Okay.
I'm there to listen to their proposal, just like you and all your neighbors.
Is that this Thursday?
This Thursday, the
Okay.
20 at St. Babel's at 7 o'clock.
Okay.
And that. So, like I say, I ask you not to get upset, not to form an opinion yet, because nothing has been developed, nothing has been proposed, and that. And I haven't even been addressed on it. And you would think, as the representative of that area, they would come to me first, but they didn't. And I'm going to make that noted to them on Thursday, that they would go to the community before they would come to me. And that, so that disturbs me. And as you know, I grew up in that area.
Yeah, I know.
I played in that area. I didn't have Little League, because they didn't have Little League when I was there, but I played at Mary Gibbard. My sons played at the Southwest Little League. And that, so, like I say, I have a fond memory of that park. I have a fond memory of that neighborhood, because that's where I grew up. And that, and I will represent you and the constituents in that area for what they want.
Okay.
So all I ask is that if you hear something, you keep me informed, and I will do the same.
Yep, I sure will. Like I said, I'm just, going by what we heard at that meeting.
Yeah,
and,
well, like I say,
just-
I would like for you to come this Thursday
I
and
would-
that, and so that you can hear what I have to say to
Yep.
them, how I address them, and what I think should be done, if anything.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I know I've talked to you on the phone. I know you
Yeah.
showed me stuff on the phone,
Yeah.
too. I guess I panicked and I didn't want coming here without me letting you guys know how I
Yeah.
felt.
I just
about
don't
it,
want
so-
you to get your blood pressure up, because nothing has been
Well, thank goodness I
set
don't
in
have high
stone
blood pressure, so.
and that. So just relax,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for
Thank
coming.
you. Yep.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak under privilege of the floor? Is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak under privilege of the floor? Hearing no one, thank you. Unfinished business. There is no unfinished business of which I am aware. New business. Is there any new business to come before the council? Mr. Mamalandi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to make an announcement that the Twin Branch Neighborhood Watch meeting typically holds meetings on the third Wednesday of each month. However, this month, due to some scheduling conflicts with both the potential speaker and some of the hosts of the meeting, we will have to reschedule it, cancel Wednesday's meeting on the 19th, and reschedule that for November 16th. So no meeting this month, next meeting, November 16th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Volker. Was that your hand raised or gesture down there?
She's juggling.
You were
Trying to get
juggling.
his
Mr.
We're still
blood pressure down.
debating down here.
Well, talk amongst yourselves, we'll move on. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to, point of, for my meeting, as I said, is this Thursday at St. Babel's at 7 o'clock. We're talking about the proposed that Habitat for Community has set up that they want to talk about. There again, it's just to talk about, and nothing's in stone. And again, as usual, we'll have West End donuts for everybody that's there. So there'll be more than ample. So again, look forward to seeing you on this Thursday, 7 o'clock. It's open to everybody in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other new business to come before the council? Hearing none, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.